Call a member for Strathfield.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to honour the life of Anne Burton, OAM, and I'd like to acknowledge her daughter Sue and friend Paul, who are in the gallery this evening. Anne was a remarkable woman of the Strathfield community who lived not just a long life, but a full one. I had the privilege of knowing Anne over a number of years. I remember meeting her at an event at Strathfield Library over 3 years ago. We were chatting and she mentioned quite casually that she'd just renewed her driver's licence, and she told me how, being over the age of 80, she had to renew it every year. I asked her, well, how old are you now, Anne? 101, she said. I nearly fell over. Not just because she was still driving, but because how she carried herself. There was a sparkle in her conversation, a twinkle in her eye, a spring in her step. She wasn't just living, she was engaged, curious, alive to the world. Later that year, I held a community forum on wellbeing and longevity, and Anne was my special guest. And I asked her, what's your secret? She said very simply, stay interested in life. It has so much to offer. And then, with that twinkle in her eye, she added, she also liked to sleep in. A life, Mr. Speaker, of 104 years stretches across generations, across moments of joy and hardship that most of us can barely imagine. Anne's life began in a very different Australia. She lived through extraordinary times. She knew loss from a young age, but what defined her was not hardship, it was optimism. She chose again and again to remain open to life. She volunteered during the war, later worked as an air hostess in the early days of Australian aviation, and then raised 6 children. And then in 1963, she made Strathfield her home, and our community is better for it, because Anne didn't simply live in Strathfield, she contributed to it quietly and generously. She delivered Meals on Wheels until the age of 90. She supported local schools, helped in canteens, taught children to sew, and opened her home to others, hosting lunches for women who might otherwise have been isolated. She lived her faith through action, through St. Martha's, through service, through compassion. She was deeply devoted to her Catholic faith, but as her daughter Sue reflected in her eulogy earlier today, Anne was never afraid to think for herself. She didn't preach her faith. She lived it quietly, steadily, in the way she moved through the world and in the way she cared for others. Anne was a devoted mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She raised 6 children, and while she was blessed with a large and loving family, she also knew deep loss, with her son Frank passing away in 2015, a grief she carried with quiet strength and dignity. Her daughter Therese said of her, her family and her faith was most important to her. She was an incredible woman, and I think that captures Anne perfectly. A life grounded in family, a life guided by faith, a life expressed through service. And in that simple philosophy, she shared, stay interested in life. Earlier today, at St. Martha's, her family and friends gathered to farewell her. And in the eulogy prepared by her daughter Sue, there's a beautiful image of the trees outside the church, trees that Anne helped plant many years ago, trees that now stand tall, their roots deep in the place she called home, their branches lifted quietly to the sky. And as mourners stepped out into the light, they passed those trees, and perhaps in that moment felt something of Anne still present. Not in words, not in memory alone, but in the living world around them, in the quiet, steady unfolding of something she began long ago. That's her legacy. Not something that ends, but something that carried forward. In the lives she touched, in the community she helped shape, in the kindness that finds its way again and again into the hands of others. On behalf of the people of Strathfield, I extend my deepest condolences to Anne's daughters, Therese, Trudy, Jackie, Sue and Fiona, and her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and to all who loved her. And I thank them for sharing Anne with us, because in the end, a life like Anne's does not just belong to a family. It belongs in part to a community, and we are all better for having known her. May she rest in peace.